Welcome, I'm glad you're here. This video is a brief summary on a paper assigned for one of my classes, Taylor et al. 2024, and you can find the full citation in the notes. To address and eliminate sexual harassment in sport organization, it must be recognized and acknowledged at a systematic level, as gender inequality and sexual harassment are mutually reinforcing, perpetuating each other, and contributing to organizational corruption. Gender-based violence, including sexual harassment, stems from women's subordinate status in society and encompasses a range of abuses. And this video and the manuscript it is based on focuses on the experiences of cisgender women while acknowledging that such violence affects transgender, non-binary, and gender-fluid individuals as well as men. Women working in male-dominated sport organizations face higher instances of unethical conduct and discrimination compared to more gender-based or female-dominated organizations due to institutionalized sexism and stakeholder influence, leading to their underrepresentation, marginalization, and a culture conducive to ongoing sexual harassment and discrimination. And this paper that we're reading explores how gender-based violence and sexual harassment in sport organizations perpetuate gender inequality through the lived experiences of women who have faced these issues, and demonstrating how organizational structures contribute to these environments. This study applies a gender lens to understand how power relations and historically patriarchal cultures shape gender-based violence and sexual harassment in sport organizations, and positions that these organizations create environments where gender inequality and sexual harassment are intertwined and mutually reinforcing. Sexual harassment and gender inequality in sport organizations, like I said, mutually reinforcing, leading to integrity failure, and that organizational failure to protect women against gender-based violence and sexual harassment is often viewed as a success by maintaining a gender hierarchy that hinders women's career progression or drives them out of the industry. So there's this framework by Connell and his colleagues, 2006, about gender relations that provides a lens to understand the complex social structure of gender within sport organizations, and it highlights the need for all stakeholders to recognize gender inequality. It fosters a collaborative relationship between men and women and ensure women hold leadership positions to advance gender equality. And so Connell and his colleagues in 2021, with this gender relations framework, encompass power, economic, emotional, and symbolic dimensions, provides a comprehensive understanding of gender regimes within organizations, particularly in the sport industry. And this framework highlights the interconnectedness of these dimensions and the challenges in changing gender relations. And by examining how women experience the negative gender-based violence and sexual harassment, the framework actually exposes systematic organizational failures that perpetuate inequality within sport organizations. So the authors of the paper, Taylor et al., used a phenomenological analysis approach to capture and understand the lived experiences of women who have faced gender-based violence as well as sexual harassment. To learn more about the detailed methodology and the findings of this study, check out the full paper in the Journal of Sport Management, because this video is actually tailored for practitioners and for students, and I will keep the content that is relevant to them. If you're a researcher or you're trying to get information for other purposes, I highly encourage you to read the entire paper. So, the findings, it was really clear that the participants had real passion for sports, and this was what initially motivated their careers in the sport industry. And they faced significant tension as well as feelings of betrayal due to the gender nature of sport organizations, which were predominantly designed for men. And this experience of sexual harassment and gender-based violence influenced their decision to leave their positions or leave their organizations, and affected how they navigated these issues. So sport organizations may appear successful despite perpetuating gender inequality and sexual harassment, as these issues remain unreported and unaddressed. And this lack of acknowledgement actually allows organizations to maintain the status quo and achieve their goals at the expense of women employees. An organization's failure to address sexual harassment and gender-based violence does not preclude their perceived success. Instead, such failures enable the continuation of gender hierarchies where men retain power and women face career stagnation or leave the industry altogether. This perpetuates existing inequalities and supports the status quo. And if we reflect on Connell et al.'s concept of gender regimes, through both extreme and passive forms of discrimination, throughout their career, women in the sport industry face persistent gender-based violence and harassment. And this highlights how organizational power dynamics and economic relationships shape their experiences. So the findings of this paper demonstrate that sport organizations are designed predominantly by men. They create environments where women are tokenized and gender inequality is perpetuated. And despite evidence of gender-related issues being dismissed in male-dominated workplaces, this is still occurring. Emotional relations within gender regimes influence how women in sport organizations respond and navigate sexual harassment, often leading them to either minimize or ignore sexual harassment due to expected gender norms. Additionally, the sexualization of emotional connections with male colleagues not only exploits women but also compounds their vulnerability by failing to protect them from harassment. The findings perpetuate inequality through both the silencing of women and the structural containment of sexual harassment, leading to the maintenance of power imbalances and the ongoing perpetuation of sexual abuse. This is described as an invisible box of containment, which highlights how organizational structures obscure and minimize the impact of sexual harassment while reinforcing the control over women. The strategies used by organizations can also be understood as containment strategies drawn from research and military organization. And these containment strategies explain how sport organizations suppress and conceal sexual harassment, maintaining the power hierarchies and the gender hierarchies. And containment involves both minimizing the impact of such issues and keeping them within the organization, preventing them from reaching the public domain, which contributes to the perpetuation and concealment of sexual harassment within sport organizations. Human resource department in organizations, in this case, function as containment actors by failing to support or protect employees who reported sexual harassment. Instead of addressing the harassment in an effective manner, these departments dismiss the reports, question the motives of the person reporting, and used a legal-centric approach to minimize and conceal the issues, thereby reinforcing the invisibility and perpetuation of sexual harassment within the organization. So, subtle and continuous sexual harassment experienced by the women in this male-dominated environment served as this containment strategy that exacerbating their feelings of powerlessness, emotional distress, and eventual exit from the organization. These form of harassment reinforced gender power relations and contributed to the organizational design that maintain male dominance and hinder women's career advancement. Despite recognizing the problematic nature of gender-based violence, and sexual harassment, women felt powerless and they couldn't address these issues due to entrenched gender dynamic within their own organizations, which also failed to provide effective reporting mechanisms or any support, thereby reinforcing gender regimes and employing containment strategies. And these containment strategies in sport organizations then were used to manipulate, exclude, silence women employees, allowing the organizations to maintain the status quo and avoid public backlash while protecting their commercial interests. And these strategies can be if we want to, right? By adopting inclusive policies that foster diversity and are supportive of inclusive cultures. That's easier said than done though. So, if we're practical, to address and prevent gender inequality and sexual harassment in sport organizations, we have to take measures. We have to implement measures, including acknowledging the organization level failure caused by failing these women, disrupting the cycles of tension and betrayal that they're feeling, increasing gender diversity in senior leadership positions to improve policies and reduce harassment, achieve long-term gender equality and address sexual harassment in our sport organization. It is crucial that we design and evaluate policies that actually acknowledge and address the vulnerability of underrepresented groups and confront resistance from the people in power and establish transparent and protecting reporting mechanisms. Sport organizations must move beyond individual level solutions and implement systematic changes to address and transform organizational cultures that perpetuate gender inequality. Adopting an ethical approach, zero tolerance policies, and ensuring a fair treatment and promoting employee well-being. For effective cultural change in sport organizations, leaders must be held accountable, and the organization must undergo an audit to identify and address containment strategies, incorporating feedback from marginalized employees and implementing intentional policies and practices to reduce sexual harassment and move away from maintaining the status quo. Sport organizations must implement thorough vetting procedures, including mandatory background checks, to prevent problematic individuals from moving from one organization to the next and avoiding accountability for gender-based violence and sexual harassment that they have previously engaged in. So to sum it all up, the authors of Taylor et al. 2024 provide evidence for the existence of gendered regimes and utilization of containment strategies to maintain a gender hierarchy in sport organizations, at least the ones represented in their study, which, as currently structured and designed, purposely contain gender-based violence and sexual harassment to achieve organizational success. Therefore, sport organizations simultaneously fail women and accomplish organizational goals of maintaining the status quo and avoiding the public perceptions of failure. And these gender regimes and containment strategies lead to negative organizational cultures and have harmful impacts on employee well-being and premature departure from organizations as well as the industry. I'm glad you joined me today. Thank you for doing so. If you are my student, read that paper and I will see you in class, where we will talk some more about how to eradicate sexual harassment from sport organization. If you are not my student and just stumbled across this video, stay tuned for more strategies for vibrant, sustainable sport organizations that thrive in the dynamic sport industry.